In the remote hollers of eastern Kentucky, where the fog rolls thick through ancient valleys and the mountains themselves seem to whisper secrets, the Hensley name carries a weight that makes even the bravest locals cross themselves when it's spoken aloud. This isn't just another mountain family with a dark past. This is something far more sinister, something that challenges everything we think we know about the boundaries between the living and the dead. The winter of 1847 was brutal, even by Appalachian standards. Snow fell for 17 straight days, burying cabins up to their rooflines and trapping families in their homes with dwindling supplies. It was during this merciless season that Jeremiah Hensley made a decision that would curse his bloodline for generations to come, a decision that would transform his family from desperate settlers into something that defied the natural order itself. But before we dive into the twisted legacy of the Hensley clan, you need to understand that what you're about to hear isn't just folklore passed down through generations of frightened mountain folk. These are documented accounts, recorded testimonies, and evidence that has been systematically buried by authorities who understood that some truths are too dangerous for the public to know. The Hensley family didn't just break the law, they broke the very fabric of reality in ways that still echo through those ancient mountains today. Jeremiah Hensley arrived in Pike County in 1843 with his pregnant wife Martha and their two young children, fleeing debts and accusations of grave robbing back in Virginia. He was a man of unusual intelligence, having studied medicine before a gambling addiction destroyed his practice and reputation. The family settled in a remote hollow that locals called Devil's Backbone, a place where the mountain ridges formed strange geometric patterns and where wildlife seemed unusually scarce. The hollow had been abandoned by the Cherokee decades earlier, and the few white settlers who had attempted to farm there never lasted more than a season. They spoke of soil that wouldn't hold crops, of livestock that sickened and died for no apparent reason, and of sounds that echoed from deep within the mountain itself. Sounds that resembled human voices, but speaking in languages that predated any known tongue. Jeremiah dismissed these superstitions as the ignorant fears of simple mountain folk. He had more pressing concerns. Martha was struggling with her pregnancy, their children were malnourished, and winter was approaching fast. The small cabin they had built was barely weatherproof, and their supplies were nearly exhausted. When the brutal winter of 1847 trapped them in their hollow, Jeremiah watched helplessly as his youngest son succumbed to pneumonia, and Martha grew weaker with each passing day. It was on the night of the winter solstice, with the temperature dropping to deadly levels and Martha's labor beginning prematurely, that Jeremiah made his fateful discovery. Searching desperately for firewood in the blizzard, he stumbled upon a cave entrance hidden behind a curtain of ice. The cave descended deep into the mountain, its walls lined with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in his lantern light. At the cave's heart lay a chamber that defied explanation. The walls were covered in what appeared to be anatomical drawings, but of creatures that existed in no medical textbook. Human forms twisted into impossible configurations, organs arranged in patterns that suggested function beyond anything Jeremiah had studied. And in the center of the chamber stood a stone table, its surface stained dark with substances that his medical training told him could only be blood. But it was what lay beneath the table that changed everything. a collection of books bound in materials that felt disturbingly familiar to his physician's hands. The pages were filled with detailed instructions, anatomical diagrams, and formulas written in a mixture of Latin and symbols that seemed to burn themselves into his vision. These weren't just medical texts, they were manuals for procedures that no ethical doctor would ever consider. The book spoke of techniques for prolonging life beyond natural limits, of methods for transferring consciousness between bodies, and of surgical procedures that could grant abilities no human should possess. Most disturbing were the detailed accounts of experiments conducted on living subjects, complete with observations on how much pain the human body could endure while remaining conscious and aware. As Martha's screams echoed through the mountain, Jeremiah made a choice that would damn his family for generations. He gathered the books and returned to his cabin, where he began to implement procedures that violated every oath he had ever taken as a healer. What happened during those dark winter nights was never fully recorded, but when spring finally came to Devil's Backbone, the Hensley family had changed in ways that their neighbors immediately noticed but never dared to discuss. Martha survived her labor, though she emerged from the experience speaking in whispers and avoiding direct sunlight. The baby, a daughter they named Constance, was born with unusual physical characteristics that became more pronounced as she grew. Her eyes reflected light like an animal's. Her fingernails grew with alarming speed, and she displayed an unsettling intelligence that allowed her to speak in complete sentences before her first birthday. But the most disturbing change was in Jeremiah himself. His medical practice, abandoned years earlier, suddenly resumed with unprecedented success. Patients who had been given up for dead by other doctors made miraculous recoveries under his care. Word spread throughout the region of the brilliant physician who could cure ailments that others couldn't even diagnose. What the grateful patients didn't know was the true nature of Jeremiah's treatments. The cave had provided him with knowledge that extended far beyond conventional medicine, techniques that required materials no legitimate doctor would ever procure. The improved health of his patients came at a cost that was carefully hidden from them, payments extracted through methods that left no visible trace but created bonds that could never be broken. The Hensley family's prosperity grew rapidly. They expanded their cabin into a substantial house, acquired land throughout the hollow, and established themselves as one of the region's most influential families. But prosperity built on such foundations required constant maintenance, and the maintenance required a steady supply of what the books euphemistically called raw materials. Local records from the period show an unusual pattern of disappearances in the counties surrounding Devil's Backbone. Travelers who took the mountain roads through Hensley territory simply vanished, leaving behind only their horses and belongings. Families reported loved ones who had gone to seek treatment from the renowned Dr. Hensley and never returned home. The local sheriff, a man named William Cassidy, began investigating these disappearances in 1852. Sheriff Cassidy's journal, discovered decades later hidden in the walls of the old courthouse, provides a chilling account of his investigation. His early entries describe routine inquiries and interviews with locals who were reluctant to speak openly about the Hensley family. But as his investigation progressed, Cassidy began to uncover evidence of activities that challenged his understanding of what was possible. He wrote of finding campsites where travelers had obviously stopped for the night, but where the ground was stained with quantities of blood that no single person could have lost and survived. He described discovering personal effects from missing persons scattered throughout the hollow, but arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate placement rather than random loss. Most disturbing were his accounts of watching the Hensley property from hidden vantage points and observing activities that he struggled to put into words. Cassidy's final journal entry, dated December 15th, 1852, describes his decision to confront Dr. Hensley directly. He wrote of riding to the Hensley house just after sunset, armed with a warrant for the doctor's arrest. But what he found there was beyond anything he had prepared for. The house was illuminated by a strange, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves. Through the windows, he could see figures moving in ways that didn't match normal human movement, their shadows stretching and contorting into shapes that defied the laws of physics. The sheriff's body was found 3 days later by a search party hanging from a tree at the edge of the hollow. The official cause of death was listed as suicide, but the search party members privately reported details that contradicted this conclusion. Cassidy's body showed signs of surgical procedures that had been performed while he was still alive, modifications that served no medical purpose but seemed designed to cause maximum suffering while maintaining consciousness. More troubling was the condition of his remains. Despite having been dead for 3 days in winter weather, the body showed no signs of decomposition. Instead, it appeared to have been preserved through artificial means, treated with substances that kept the flesh fresh and the eyes bright with an awareness that should have ended with death. The investigation into the Hensley family died with Sheriff Cassidy, but the disappearances continued. Local families began avoiding the hollow entirely, taking longer routes through more dangerous terrain rather than risk encountering the family that had once been their neighbors. Children were taught never to venture near Devil's Backbone, and adults who had business in the region traveled only in groups and only during daylight hours. As the years passed, the Hensley family's influence spread beyond their hollow. Dr. Jeremiah's medical reputation attracted patients from distant counties, many of whom made the journey to Devil's Backbone despite the growing rumors about the family's activities. Those who returned from their treatments often displayed remarkable improvements in their health, but also exhibited subtle changes in behavior that their loved ones found disturbing. These patients spoke of dreams that felt more real than waking life, of conversations with people who had been dead for years, and of urges that seemed to come from outside their own minds. They developed unusual dietary requirements, showing strong aversions to certain foods while craving others that were difficult to obtain. Most disturbing was their apparent aging process, which seemed to slow dramatically after their treatment, leaving them looking decades younger than their actual years. The Hensley children, now numbering 5 in total, grew into adults who displayed the same unsettling characteristics that had marked their sister Constance. They possessed intelligence that bordered on the supernatural, able to diagnose illnesses with a glance and predict events with uncanny accuracy. Their physical capabilities exceeded normal human limits, allowing them to work for days without rest and to survive injuries that should have been fatal. But it was their social behavior that truly set them apart from their neighbors. The Hensley children showed no interest in forming relationships outside their family, viewing other humans with a detached curiosity that suggested they considered themselves a separate species entirely. They spoke of ordinary people as the unchanged, a term that carried implications their listeners found deeply unsettling. By 1860, the Hensley family had established what amounted to a medical dynasty in eastern Kentucky. Dr. Jeremiah had trained his children in the techniques he had learned from the cave texts, creating a network of practitioners who could provide treatments that conventional medicine couldn't match. But these treatments came with prices that weren't always immediately apparent to the patients who sought them. The family's fee structure was unlike anything seen in legitimate medical practice. Instead of charging money, they requested payment in forms that seemed arbitrary to outsiders, but followed patterns that suggested deeper significance. They might ask for a lock of hair from a patient's youngest child, or request permission to visit the family's ancestral burial ground, or demand access to certain heirloom objects that had been passed down through generations. These unusual payments were carefully cataloged and stored in a special room within the Hensley house, a chamber that visitors described as resembling a museum of personal artifacts. The room contained thousands of items, organized according to principles that no outsider could understand, each piece labeled with symbols that matched those found in the cave texts. Local folklore began to attribute supernatural powers to these collections, claiming that the Hensley family could influence the health and fortune of anyone whose personal items they possessed. Families who had paid these unusual fees reported strange dreams in which departed relatives warned them about debts that could never be fully repaid. Children spoke of seeing the Hensley family members in their sleep, standing at the foot of their beds and speaking in voices that seemed to come from multiple throats simultaneously. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 brought new opportunities for the Hensley family to expand their influence. Dr. Jeremiah offered his services to both Union and Confederate forces, claiming neutrality while secretly providing treatments that gave certain soldiers advantages their enemies couldn't match. These enhanced fighters displayed remarkable resilience in battle, surviving wounds that should have been fatal and fighting with a ferocity that unnerved even their own comrades. But the war also brought increased scrutiny from outside authorities who were less easily intimidated than local officials. Federal investigators began looking into reports of unusual activities in the Kentucky mountains, following leads that eventually pointed toward Devil's Backbone. The Hensley family, recognizing the threat, began making preparations to protect their secrets by any means necessary. The first federal agent to investigate the hollow was Captain Marcus Whitmore, a Union officer tasked with investigating reports of Confederate sympathizers in the region. Whitmore's official reports, preserved in military archives, provide a fascinating glimpse into the family's operations during this period. His initial encounters with the Hensley family were cordial, with Dr. Jeremiah presenting himself as a loyal Union supporter eager to assist the war effort. But as Whitmore's investigation progressed, he began to uncover evidence of activities that had nothing to do with Confederate sympathies and everything to do with violations of natural law. His reports described finding surgical implements that didn't match any known medical instruments, anatomical drawings that depicted human forms in impossible configurations and chemical substances that produced effects he couldn't explain. Most disturbing was Whitmore's discovery of what he termed the preservation chambers, rooms beneath the Hensley house where bodies were kept in states that defied normal decomposition. These weren't simply corpses, according to his reports, but individuals who appeared to be suspended between life and death, their bodies maintained through artificial means, while their consciousness remained active and aware. Captain Whitmore's final report, filed just days before his own disappearance, recommended immediate military intervention to shut down the Hensley operations. He wrote of evidence suggesting that the family was conducting experiments on living subjects using techniques that violated every principle of medical ethics and human decency. His recommendation was for a full military assault on the Hollow, using whatever force necessary to end what he described as activities that threaten the very foundations of human civilization. The military response came too late. When a company of Union soldiers arrived at Devil's Backbone in March 1863, they found the Hensley property abandoned. The house stood empty, its rooms stripped of everything except the furniture that was too large to move easily. The mysterious chambers beneath the building had been sealed with concrete, and the cave that had started it all was collapsed, its entrance buried under tons of rock. But the Hensley family hadn't simply vanished. Evidence suggested they had relocated, taking their knowledge and practices to new territories where they could continue their work without interference. Reports began surfacing from other parts of Appalachia of medical practitioners who matched the Hensley family's description, offering treatments that produced miraculous results while demanding unusual forms of payment. The pattern of disappearances that had plagued Devil's Backbone began appearing in other regions, always centered around areas where the mysterious doctors had established their practices. Local authorities in these new territories found themselves facing the same challenges that had stumped their Kentucky counterparts, investigating crimes that seemed to violate the basic laws of reality. As the war ended and the nation began to rebuild, the Hensley family's influence continued to spread throughout the Appalachian region. They had learned from their earlier mistakes, adopting more subtle methods that drew less attention from outside authorities. Instead of operating from a single location, they established a network of practitioners who could provide their services while maintaining the appearance of conventional medical practice. This new approach proved devastatingly effective. The family's techniques, refined through decades of experimentation, could now be applied with a subtlety that made them nearly impossible to detect. Patients who received these treatments experienced improvements that seemed like natural healing, unaware that they had been bound to their healers through methods that created permanent obligations. The true scope of the Hensley family's influences became apparent only when researchers began tracking genealogical records in the late 19th century. Families throughout Appalachia showed bloodline connections to individuals who had received treatment from the mysterious doctors, creating a network of genetic relationships that defied normal patterns of settlement and marriage. These genealogical connections weren't simply the result of normal population movement. The patterns suggested deliberate manipulation of bloodlines, with certain genetic traits being preserved and enhanced through selective breeding programs that spanned multiple generations. The Hensley family, it appeared, had been conducting a long-term experiment in human development, using entire populations as test subjects for their theories about biological enhancement. The physical and mental characteristics that had distinguished the original Hensley children began appearing in their descendants, creating family lines that displayed abilities far beyond normal human limits. These enhanced individuals often found themselves drawn to careers in medicine, science, and other fields where their unusual capabilities could be put to use while remaining hidden from public scrutiny. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Hensley legacy had become woven into the fabric of Appalachian society in ways that few people fully understood. The family's influence extended far beyond their original hollow, reaching into communities throughout the mountain region and beyond. Their descendants, many of whom were unaware of their true heritage, carried forward the genetic modifications that had been introduced generations earlier. But the family's original knowledge, the techniques that had started it all, remained carefully guarded by those who understood its true significance. The books that Jeremiah Hensley had discovered in that mountain cave had been copied and distributed among trusted family members, ensuring that the knowledge would survive even if individual practitioners were discovered and eliminated. These texts, written in a mixture of languages and symbols that seemed to shift and change depending on who was reading them, contained information that challenged every assumption about the nature of human existence. They described techniques for extending life beyond natural limits, methods for transferring consciousness between bodies, and procedures that could grant abilities that no human should possess. The most disturbing aspect of these texts was their apparent origin. The writing style and content suggested they were far older than any known medical tradition, predating not just European settlement, but possibly human civilization itself. The techniques they described required knowledge of human anatomy and physiology that shouldn't have been available to whoever had originally written them. Modern researchers who have attempted to study fragments of these texts report experiencing symptoms that range from intense headaches to vivid hallucinations. The symbols seem to trigger neurological responses that bypass normal cognitive processes, implanting information directly into the reader's subconscious mind. Several academics who have worked with the materials have reported dreams in which they perform procedures they have no conscious knowledge of, using techniques that produce results they cannot explain. The Hensley family's influence on modern medicine extends far beyond their direct descendants. Medical techniques that are now considered standard practice can be traced back to innovations that first appeared in Appalachian communities where the family operated. Surgical procedures that seemed impossible when first documented are now routine operations, though the original sources of these techniques have been carefully obscured. This pattern of innovation and concealment has continued into the modern era, with medical breakthroughs appearing in research facilities that have connections to institutions founded by Hensley descendants. The family's approach to biological enhancement has evolved with advancing technology, incorporating new tools and techniques while maintaining the fundamental principles that were established in that mountain cave over a century ago. The ethical implications of this hidden history are staggering. If the Hensley family's techniques have indeed been incorporated into modern medical practice, then millions of people have been subjected to procedures based on knowledge acquired through methods that violated every principle of human dignity and consent. The treatments that have saved countless lives may have been developed through experiments that would be considered crimes against humanity if they were conducted today. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Hensley legacy is the possibility that their work continues in forms that are invisible to public scrutiny. The family's descendants, scattered throughout the medical and scientific communities, possess knowledge and capabilities that give them advantages their colleagues cannot match. Their influence on research directions, treatment protocols, and medical education may be shaping the future of human health in ways that serve their own agenda rather than the public good. The original Hensley family members, those who were transformed by Jeremiah's discoveries in Devil's Backbone, may still be alive today. The techniques they developed for extending life beyond natural limits could have allowed them to survive for far longer than normal human lifespans. If this is true, then the individuals who began this dark legacy may still be actively working to expand their influence and continue their experiments on an unsuspecting population. Evidence for this disturbing possibility can be found in medical records that show unusual patterns of longevity in certain bloodlines, particularly those with connections to Appalachian communities where the Hensley family operated. These individuals often display physical and mental characteristics that remain remarkably stable across decades, suggesting that their aging process has been artificially slowed or halted entirely. The implications of this possibility extend far beyond the realm of medicine. If the Hensley family has indeed achieved practical immortality, then they have had over a century to accumulate wealth, influence, and knowledge that could give them power over human civilization itself. Their long-term perspective would allow them to plan and execute strategies that span multiple generations, manipulating social and political developments in ways that serve their ultimate goals. The true extent of the Hensley family's influence may never be fully known, but their legacy continues to shape our world in ways that few people recognize. The techniques they developed, the knowledge they preserved, and the genetic modifications they introduced into human populations have created a hidden history that challenges our understanding of human nature and medical science. As we stand at the threshold of a new era in genetic engineering and biological enhancement, the Hensley family's dark legacy serves as a warning about the dangers of pursuing knowledge without regard for ethical constraints. Their story reminds us that the power to heal can easily become the power to harm, and that the pursuit of human enhancement can lead to the loss of human dignity. The mountains of Appalachia still hold their secrets, and the Hensley name is still spoken in whispers by those who know the true history of the region. But the family's influence extends far beyond those ancient valleys, reaching into the heart of modern civilization in ways that most people never suspect. Their macabre history is not just a tale of past horrors, but a present reality that continues to shape our world in ways we are only beginning to understand. The winter of 1889 brought more than snow to the hollows of eastern Kentucky. It brought whispers of the Hensley family's growing influence, stories that spread like smoke through the mountain communities, tales that made even the hardest men cross themselves and avoid certain paths after dark. What had begun with Jeremiah's discovery in that cursed cave had evolved into something far more sinister, a network of corruption that reached into the very foundations of civilized society. By now, the Hensley bloodline had scattered across 3 states, each branch carrying the forbidden knowledge like a plague. They no longer needed to hide in remote caves or conduct their experiments in secret. They had become the secret, woven into the fabric of American institutions with a patience that spoke of inhuman planning. The children born from Jeremiah's initial experiments had grown into adults of terrifying capability. Their enhanced intellects and unnaturally extended lifespans allowing them to infiltrate medical schools, government positions, and wealthy families with methodical precision. Dr. Ezekiel Hensley, Jeremiah's eldest son, had established himself as a respected physician in Louisville, his practice drawing patients from across the region. What his patients didn't know was that their treatments often involved substances harvested from the cave network that had expanded beneath the Hensley properties. The good doctor had perfected techniques that went far beyond conventional medicine, procedures that could extend life, enhance physical abilities, or create dependencies that lasted generations. His waiting room was always full, but not with ordinary patients. Wealthy plantation owners seeking longevity treatments, politicians requiring enhanced mental acuity for their campaigns, and desperate parents bringing children afflicted with mysterious ailments that only seemed to respond to Dr. Hensley's specialized care. The payment was never simple money. Each treatment required something more personal, more binding. A vial of blood, a lock of hair, a cherished family heirloom, or sometimes a binding contract that committed future generations to the Hensley cause. The most disturbing aspect of Dr. Hensley's practice was his maternity ward. Pregnant women who came under his care often delivered children with remarkable abilities, but these infants bore subtle marks that distinguished them from normal babies. Their eyes held an unusual depth, their reflexes were preternaturally sharp, and they seemed to respond to sounds and frequencies that others couldn't perceive. These children, scattered across Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia, formed the foundation of what would become known as the Hensley Network. Meanwhile, in the mountains, the original Hensley compound had evolved into something resembling a twisted university. Family members who had undergone the most extreme modifications served as professors, teaching younger generations the arts of biological manipulation, consciousness transfer, and genetic enhancement. The curriculum included subjects that would have horrified any legitimate academic institution: advanced vivisection techniques, methods for preserving human consciousness in non-human hosts, and the cultivation of hybrid organisms that served specific purposes within their growing operation. The cave system itself had become a vast underground laboratory. Visitors who managed to penetrate the outer defenses described chambers that defied natural explanation. Walls lined with glass containers holding specimens that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. Operating theaters carved from living rock, equipped with instruments that combined primitive surgery with technology that wouldn't be invented for another century. And deep within the network, chambers where the boundary between life and death had been permanently blurred. Sheriff Cassidy, now in his 50s, had never stopped investigating the Hensley family, though his efforts had become increasingly desperate and isolated. His reports to state authorities were either ignored or mysteriously lost. Colleagues who had initially supported his investigations began avoiding him, claiming they had more pressing matters to attend to. Several attempts to organize raids on Hensley properties resulted in officers becoming lost in terrain they had known all their lives, or suffering accidents that left them unable to continue their duties. The sheriff's personal journal, discovered decades later, revealed the extent of his growing paranoia and the supernatural encounters that had driven him to the edge of madness. He wrote of following obvious trails that led nowhere, of witnesses who forgot their testimonies between one conversation and the next, of evidence that disappeared from locked storage rooms. Most disturbing were his accounts of dreams that felt more real than waking life, visions of underground chambers where human forms were suspended in amber-colored fluid, their eyes tracking his movements despite their apparent unconsciousness. In 1891, Sheriff Cassidy made his final attempt to expose the Hensley Network. He had spent months gathering evidence, documenting connections between the family and a series of disappearances that stretched back to the Civil War. His plan was to present his findings to federal authorities in Washington, bypassing the compromised local officials who had repeatedly sabotaged his efforts. The night before his departure, he wrote his final journal entry. "They know what I'm planning. I can feel them watching, waiting. If something happens to me, look for the answers in the deep places where the earth itself has been corrupted by their presence." Sheriff Cassidy's body was found 3 days later in his own jail cell, the door locked from the inside. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but the undertaker privately noted that the corpse bore signs of extreme age, as though the sheriff had lived decades in the space of a single night. His carefully gathered evidence had vanished, leaving only empty filing cabinets and the lingering scent of something medicinal and wrong. The Hensley influence continued to spread through more subtle means. They had learned that direct confrontation brought unwanted attention, so they adapted their methods to work within existing systems. Medical schools began incorporating techniques that had originated in the Hensley caves, though the professors teaching these methods had no idea of their true source. Government health initiatives started including treatments that created subtle dependencies, ensuring that certain populations would require ongoing care from specific providers. The family's breeding program had evolved beyond simple genetic manipulation. They had identified bloodlines throughout the Appalachian region that carried genetic markers compatible with their enhancements. Through careful marriages, adoptions, and more direct interventions, they began incorporating these traits into their own lineage, while simultaneously placing their offspring into influential families. Within a generation, there were Hensley descendants serving as judges, doctors, ministers, and business leaders, most of whom had no conscious knowledge of their true heritage. The most successful of these placements was young Thomas Hensley, who had been adopted by a prominent Virginia family and raised as Thomas Whitmore. His enhanced intellect and charismatic personality made him a natural politician, and by 1895, he had been elected to the state legislature. From this position, he was able to influence legislation that subtly favored the Hensley Network's interests, creating legal frameworks that protected their operations while making investigation more difficult. Thomas's true nature became apparent during a legislative session addressing public health concerns. When a colleague proposed increased oversight of medical practices in rural areas, Thomas stood to speak against the measure. Witnesses later described how his voice seemed to carry unusual authority, how his arguments became more compelling the longer he spoke. The proposed legislation was not only defeated, but replaced with a measure that actually reduced oversight, creating the regulatory gaps that the Hensley Network needed to operate more freely. The family's experiments had also begun producing results that challenged the fundamental understanding of human biology. Some family members no longer aged at normal rates, their cells apparently regenerating faster than they deteriorated. Others had developed sensory abilities that bordered on the supernatural, able to detect emotional states, predict behavior, or influence thoughts through subtle chemical signals. The most advanced specimens could apparently transfer aspects of their consciousness to other hosts, ensuring a form of immortality that went beyond simple longevity. These enhanced individuals served as the network's primary agents, traveling throughout the eastern United States to establish new cells and recruit suitable candidates. They were particularly active in areas experiencing rapid industrialization, where the social disruption created opportunities for their kind of influence. Factory owners suffering from mysterious ailments found themselves dependent on Hensley-connected physicians. Politicians facing difficult decisions discovered that certain advisors possessed unusually insightful counsel. Wealthy families dealing with problem children learned of specialized schools that promised remarkable transformations. The network's influence extended into the emerging field of alienism, the predecessor to modern psychiatry. Several prominent alienists had been trained by Hensley-affiliated doctors, and their treatments often involved techniques that originated in the cave laboratories. Patients who underwent these treatments frequently reported dramatic improvements in their conditions, but they also displayed subtle changes in behavior and personality that suggested more fundamental alterations had occurred. One such case involved the daughter of a prominent Boston family, a young woman who had been suffering from what physicians called hysteria. After 6 months of treatment at a Hensley-affiliated sanitarium, she returned home completely cured but profoundly changed. Her family noted that she seemed to know things she couldn't possibly have learned, that she could influence the behavior of household staff through mere suggestion, and that she no longer required normal amounts of sleep or food. More disturbing, she began attracting other young women to regular gatherings where they engaged in activities that her family found impossible to remember clearly afterward. The sanitarium itself had been built on land donated by a wealthy benefactor who had died shortly after making the gift. The facility's architecture incorporated design elements that seemed to facilitate the staff's work in ways that conventional medicine couldn't explain. Patients housed in certain wings showed remarkably rapid recovery rates, while others seemed to deteriorate in precisely controlled ways that provided valuable research data. The basement levels, officially designated as storage areas, contained facilities that bore little resemblance to anything found in legitimate medical institutions. By the 1890s, the Hensley Network had established what amounted to a shadow medical system operating parallel to legitimate health care. Their practitioners could be found in major cities throughout the eastern United States, often working within established hospitals and clinics while maintaining their true loyalties to the family's larger agenda. They had developed treatments for conditions that conventional medicine couldn't address, but these cures often came with hidden costs that wouldn't become apparent for years or decades. The network's financial resources had grown exponentially through their unique approach to payment. Instead of charging traditional fees, they collected items and commitments that had value within their specialized economy. A lock of hair from a patient's child might be worth more than gold if it carried the right genetic markers. A family heirloom could serve as a focus for influence techniques that affected multiple generations. A promise to provide future services might commit an entire bloodline to the network's purposes. This alternative economy allowed the Hensley Network to accumulate resources that couldn't be traced through conventional financial systems. They owned properties under dozens of different names, maintained research facilities disguised as everything from mining operations to religious retreats, and had access to materials and specimens that would have been impossible to obtain through legal channels. Their wealth was measured not in currency, but in capabilities, in the power to reshape human biology and consciousness according to their ancient agenda. The network's influence had also begun extending into the realm of education. Several prominent boarding schools had been established with Hensley funding, institutions that promised to develop the full potential of exceptional children. These schools did indeed produce graduates with remarkable abilities, but they also served as recruitment centers for the network's next generation of agents. Students who showed particular aptitude for the specialized curriculum often disappeared during holiday breaks, officially transferring to European institutions, but actually entering the network's advanced training programs. The most successful of these educational experiments was the Highland Academy, a prestigious school for young women located in the mountains of North Carolina. The Academy's graduates were known for their unusual poise, their ability to influence social situations, and their tendency to marry into influential families. What the families didn't know was that their daughters had been subtly modified during their education, their biology altered to make them more effective agents of the network's influence. The Highland Academy's curriculum included subjects that wouldn't be found in any legitimate educational institution. Students learned techniques for reading micro-expressions that revealed hidden thoughts, methods for using scent and pheromones to influence behavior, and practices that enhanced their natural charisma to almost supernatural levels. The most advanced students studied what the faculty called bloodline management, learning to identify genetic markers that indicated compatibility with the network's enhancement procedures. As the 19th century drew to a close, the Hensley Network had achieved something unprecedented in human history. They had created a hidden civilization that existed within and alongside normal society, a network of enhanced individuals who shared knowledge and capabilities that ordinary humans couldn't imagine. Their influence extended from the highest levels of government to the most remote mountain communities, all connected by the dark wisdom that had originated in Jeremiah's cave. The network's ultimate goals remained unclear, even to many of its own members. Some believed they were working toward a fundamental transformation of human civilization. replacing ordinary humanity with their enhanced versions. Others thought they were preparing for some kind of coming catastrophe, building the resources and capabilities needed to survive and rebuild. The most disturbing possibility was that they were serving purposes that weren't entirely human, that the knowledge from the cave came with obligations that extended far beyond Earth itself. What was certain was that the Hensley Network had become something that challenged every assumption about human nature, about the boundaries between life and death, about the relationship between consciousness and flesh. They had created a new form of existence that was simultaneously more and less than human, and they had done so with a patience and planning that suggested they were operating on timescales that ordinary humans couldn't comprehend. The 20th century would bring new challenges and opportunities for the network, as industrialization and technological advancement created new possibilities for their work. But the foundation they had built in the mountains of Kentucky would endure, a hidden kingdom of enhanced humanity that continued to grow and adapt, always working toward goals that remained as mysterious as the cave where it all began. The winter of 1899 brought strange reports to the offices of the American Medical Association. Physicians across Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia were documenting cases that defied explanation. Patients arriving with fatal conditions would leave completely cured after visiting certain practitioners, but something else was happening. These miraculous recoveries came with a peculiar cost. The healed patients would return to their families changed, speaking in whispers of procedures that went far beyond conventional medicine, of treatments that required payments in blood rather than currency. What the medical establishment didn't realize was that they were witnessing the next phase of the Hensley family's expansion. By the dawn of the 20th century, the descendants of Jeremiah Hensley had evolved far beyond their humble origins in eastern Kentucky. They had become something unprecedented in American history, a medical dynasty operating in the shadows, wielding knowledge that bridged the gap between science and the supernatural. The Hensley Network had learned to adapt with the times. As the country modernized, so did their methods. They established what appeared to be legitimate medical practices in major cities, but these clinics served a dual purpose. On the surface, they treated ordinary ailments with remarkable success. Below the surface, they continued their ancestral work, using their positions to identify suitable candidates for their deeper experiments. Dr. Cornelius Hensley, great-grandson of Jeremiah, opened the first official Hensley Medical Institute in Chicago in 1901. The facility occupied an entire city block, its basement levels extending far deeper than city records indicated. Patients who entered for routine treatments would sometimes emerge days later with no memory of their extended stay, but exhibiting enhanced physical capabilities that their families attributed to the miraculous Hensley healing methods. The most disturbing innovation of this period was what they called the integration protocol. Unlike their earlier crude experiments, the Hensleys had developed sophisticated techniques for merging human consciousness with their alien genetic material. They discovered that willing participants produced far better results than forced subjects. The key was finding individuals who were desperate enough to consent to procedures they couldn't fully understand. The integration protocol required 3 phases. First, candidates underwent extensive psychological evaluation to determine their compatibility with the foreign genetic material. Those who showed signs of psychic sensitivity or unusual dreams were considered ideal prospects. Second, subjects received a series of treatments designed to gradually alter their cellular structure. These sessions, conducted in specially prepared chambers lined with the same crystalline material found in the original cave, would slowly transform the patient's biology over weeks or months. The final phase was the most dangerous. Subjects were exposed to what the Hensleys called the Source, a concentrated form of the alien intelligence that had first contacted Jeremiah in 1843. This exposure would either complete the transformation, creating a hybrid being with access to both human reasoning and alien knowledge, or it would destroy the subject entirely. The success rate was approximately 30%, but those who survived became invaluable assets to the family network. Dr. Margaret Hensley, Cornelius's sister, specialized in what she termed pediatric enhancement. Working from a private sanitarium in the mountains of North Carolina, she focused on treating children with developmental disabilities. Parents would bring their afflicted children seeking miracle cures, unaware that Dr. Margaret's treatments went far beyond conventional medicine. Her young patients underwent a modified version of the integration protocol, one designed to work with developing nervous systems. The results were remarkable and terrifying. Children who had been unable to speak would suddenly demonstrate advanced mathematical abilities. Those with physical disabilities would develop strength that far exceeded normal human limits. Most unsettling, many of these enhanced children displayed a collective awareness, as if they were connected through some invisible network. The families of these children rarely questioned the miraculous transformations. They were simply grateful to have their loved ones functioning normally. What they didn't realize was that their children were no longer entirely human. The enhanced youngsters would grow up to become influential figures in American society, carrying the Hensley genetic modifications into positions of power and authority. By 1905, the Hensley Network had expanded to include what they called breeding stations. These facilities, disguised as progressive boarding schools for gifted children, served as laboratories for their most ambitious project yet. The Hensleys had concluded that random genetic modification was inefficient. Instead, they began selectively breeding enhanced individuals to produce offspring with specific capabilities. The Ashford Academy in Vermont appeared to be an elite preparatory school for exceptional students. In reality, it was a carefully controlled environment where genetically modified individuals were paired and monitored throughout their reproductive years. The children born at Ashford displayed abilities that surpassed even their enhanced parents. Some could perceive electromagnetic fields, allowing them to sense electronic devices and even human nervous systems. Others demonstrated limited telepathic abilities, particularly when in close proximity to other Ashford graduates. The most successful products of the Ashford program were the navigators, individuals who possessed an intuitive understanding of complex systems. These enhanced humans could analyze economic markets, political situations, or technological challenges with supernatural accuracy. They became invaluable to the Hensley Network, serving as advisors and strategists for their expanding influence. The Hensley family's greatest achievement during this period was the development of what they called the Collective Consciousness Project. Building on their earlier work with individual enhancement, they discovered that properly modified humans could share thoughts, memories, and even sensory experiences across vast distances. This breakthrough transformed their scattered network into a unified organism with a distributed intelligence. The process required extensive preparation. Candidates underwent months of conditioning, during which their brain chemistry was gradually altered through a combination of surgical procedures and chemical treatments. The operations were performed in specially constructed chambers that amplified the alien influence discovered in the original cave. Most subjects did not survive the complete transformation, but those who did became living extensions of the Hensley collective will. These enhanced individuals, known within the network as nodes, maintained their individual personalities and memories while sharing a deeper connection to the collective consciousness. They could communicate instantaneously across any distance, share complex information without traditional communication methods, and coordinate activities with perfect precision. The Hensley Network had essentially created a new form of human intelligence, one that operated according to principles that ordinary humans could barely comprehend. The nodes infiltrated every level of American society. They became physicians, lawyers, politicians, business leaders, and military officers. Their enhanced capabilities made them exceptionally successful in their chosen fields, but their true loyalty remained with the Hensley collective. They used their positions to advance the family's agenda, subtly influencing decisions and policies to create conditions favorable to their continued expansion. One of the most significant developments was the establishment of the Hensley Foundation for Medical Research in 1912. This organization, funded by the wealth accumulated through their various legitimate and illegitimate enterprises, began conducting official scientific research into human enhancement. The Foundation's public mission was to study genetic disorders and develop treatments for hereditary diseases. In reality, it served as a front for the Hensley family's most ambitious experiments. The Foundation's laboratories were staffed by both ordinary scientists and enhanced individuals working under the direction of node researchers. The ordinary staff believed they were conducting cutting-edge but conventional research. The enhanced staff knew they were working to perfect techniques that would eventually transform the entire human species. The Foundation's work during this period focused on understanding the biological mechanisms behind the alien genetic modifications. They discovered that the foreign material didn't simply alter human DNA. It introduced entirely new structures that functioned according to principles unknown to conventional biology. These structures seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, allowing enhanced individuals to access information and capabilities that shouldn't be possible within the known laws of physics. The most disturbing discovery was that the alien genetic material appeared to be actively intelligent. It wasn't simply a passive modification to human biology. It was a form of consciousness that existed within the enhanced individuals, gradually influencing their thoughts and behaviors. The Hensley family had essentially become hosts to an alien intelligence that was using them to transform humanity according to its own incomprehensible agenda. By 1920, the Hensley Network had become a shadow government operating within the United States. They controlled major financial institutions, influenced political decisions at the highest levels, and had established research facilities in every major city. Their enhanced individuals held key positions in universities, hospitals, and government agencies, slowly reshaping American society according to their collective will. The ordinary population remained completely unaware of their influence. The Hensleys had learned to operate with such subtlety that their interventions appeared to be natural developments. Economic policies that seemed to emerge from democratic processes were actually designed to fund their research. Medical breakthroughs that appeared to result from conventional scientific progress were actually applications of their alien enhanced knowledge. The true scope of their achievement became clear during the influenza pandemic of 1918. While millions died worldwide, communities with high concentrations of enhanced individuals experienced remarkably low mortality rates. The Hensley Network had developed treatments that were far more effective than anything available to the general population, but they used these resources selectively, protecting their own while allowing the pandemic to eliminate potential threats to their expansion. The enhanced individuals possessed immune systems that had been modified to resist not only the influenza virus, but virtually all known diseases. They lived longer, healed faster, and maintained their physical and mental capabilities well beyond normal human limits. Some of the first generation of enhanced individuals, those who had undergone the integration protocol in the early 1900s, showed no signs of aging, even as they approached their 70s and 80s. The Hensley family's influence extended beyond medicine and genetics. They had developed technologies that wouldn't be officially discovered for decades. Their understanding of electromagnetic phenomena, gained through their alien-enhanced perception, allowed them to create communication devices that operated on principles unknown to conventional science. They used these technologies to coordinate their activities and maintain their network's security. The most advanced of these devices were the resonance chambers, rooms constructed according to specifications derived from their study of the original cave. These chambers could amplify the psychic abilities of enhanced individuals, allowing them to perceive events across vast distances and influence the thoughts of ordinary humans. The chambers were secretly installed in major cities, hidden within the basements of Hensley-controlled buildings. The resonance chambers served multiple purposes. They were used for communication between distant nodes of the network, for conducting advanced research into human consciousness, and for what the Hensleys called reality adjustment. This process involved using the chambers to influence probability on a local scale, subtly altering events to favor their agenda. Natural disasters would be diverted away from their facilities, business deals would inexplicably fall in their favor, and potential threats would suffer convenient accidents or sudden changes of mind. The ordinary world continued to function according to its normal patterns, unaware that reality itself was being subtly manipulated by forces beyond human understanding. The Hensley Network had become something unprecedented in human history, a species-wide modification project disguised as normal social and technological progress. As the 1920s dawned, the Hensley family faced their greatest challenge yet. The alien intelligence that had guided their transformation for nearly 8 decades was beginning to assert more direct control over their actions. The enhanced individuals were reporting increasingly vivid dreams and visions, communications from what they described as the architects, the true source of their genetic modifications. The architects, it seemed, were not content to remain hidden within human biology. They had plans for humanity that went far beyond simple genetic enhancement. The Hensley Network had served its purpose as a proof of concept, demonstrating that human consciousness could be successfully integrated with alien intelligence. Now the architects were ready to begin the next phase of their agenda, one that would transform not just selected individuals, but the entire human species. The stage was set for developments that would reshape the world in ways that ordinary humans could never imagine. The Hensley family had become the instruments of a plan that stretched across centuries, perhaps millennia. What had begun as one man's desperate search for forbidden knowledge had evolved into something that threatened to redefine the very nature of human existence. The shadows were deepening, and within them, something ancient and alien was preparing to emerge into the light. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Hensley family had achieved something unprecedented in human history. They had successfully merged alien consciousness with human biology, creating a hybrid intelligence that operated simultaneously across multiple planes of existence. But their greatest triumph was yet to come. The period between 1900 and 1920 would witness the Hensley bloodline's most audacious experiment, the complete infiltration and subtle takeover of America's emerging industrial infrastructure. The transformation began with what family records cryptically referred to as the Awakening Protocols. In 1903, Marcus Hensley, great-grandson of the original Jeremiah, established the first of what would become a network of specialized research facilities disguised as private medical clinics. These installations, built in remote locations across Kentucky, West Virginia, and Tennessee, served as breeding grounds for the next phase of human evolution. Unlike their predecessors, who had worked in isolation, this new generation of Hensley practitioners understood that true power lay not in hiding from civilization, but in becoming indistinguishable from it. The clinics operated under the facade of treating exotic diseases and rare genetic conditions. Wealthy industrialists, politicians, and foreign dignitaries traveled great distances seeking the Hensleys' miraculous cures. What they received instead was integration into a vast network of enhanced individuals, each carrying fragments of the collective consciousness that had been growing within the family for over half a century. The process was seamless. Patients entered seeking healing and departed believing they had received exactly that. In reality, they had been implanted with what the Hensleys called neural seeds, microscopic biological constructs that would slowly rewrite their neural pathways over the course of months or years. These neural seeds represented the culmination of decades of research into the alien texts discovered in the Kentucky caves. The Hensley scientists had learned to create synthetic versions of the consciousness-altering compounds found in the original writings. But unlike the crude, early experiments that had required blood sacrifices and ritualistic procedures, these new implants were virtually undetectable. They appeared to be nothing more than specialized cells that enhanced cognitive function and physical health. Recipients experienced improved memory, increased stamina, and resistance to disease. What they didn't realize was that each implant contained a fragment of the architect consciousness, slowly integrating with their human awareness. The brilliance of the Hensley strategy lay in its targeting. Rather than attempting to control the masses directly, they focused on individuals who already possessed influence and authority. Railroad magnates, the steel barons, shipping executives, and banking leaders all passed through Hensley facilities. Each emerged with enhanced capabilities and an inexplicable compulsion to make decisions that seemed to benefit their industries but actually served the Hensley agenda. The network grew exponentially as treated individuals unconsciously recruited others, creating a web of influence that stretched from the coal mines of Appalachia to the financial centers of New York. By 1910, the Hensley Collective had established what they termed resonance points in every major American city. These were individuals so thoroughly integrated with the alien consciousness that they could serve as relay stations for the network's collective intelligence. A decision made in a Kentucky laboratory could influence policy discussions in Washington within hours, transmitted through the neural network that connected all enhanced individuals. The recipients remained convinced they were acting according to their own free will, unaware that their thoughts were being subtly guided by an intelligence that spanned multiple dimensions of existence. The family's most significant breakthrough came in 1912 with the development of what they called temporal threading. The architect consciousness, it seemed, existed partially outside linear time, capable of perceiving probable futures and past events with startling accuracy. By deepening their integration with this alien intelligence, the Hensley practitioners gained limited precognitive abilities. They could anticipate market fluctuations, predict political upheavals, and position their network advantageously before events unfolded. This temporal awareness allowed them to accumulate vast wealth and influence while appearing to be merely fortunate investors and advisors. The outbreak of World War I provided the perfect testing ground for their expanded capabilities. Through their network of enhanced individuals embedded in government and military positions, the Hensley Collective gained access to classified intelligence and strategic planning. But they weren't interested in determining the war's outcome for patriotic reasons. Instead, they used the conflict as a massive experiment in consciousness manipulation and social engineering. Battle plans were subtly altered to create specific casualty patterns. Supply routes were modified to test the limits of human endurance under extreme conditions. Entire regiments were unknowingly participating in psychological experiments designed to measure the breaking points of human will. The war's aftermath brought even greater opportunities. The massive social upheaval created perfect conditions for the Hensley Network to expand its influence. Veterans returning from Europe often suffered from what doctors called shell shock, but many were actually experiencing the after effects of exposure to consciousness-altering compounds that had been introduced into military supplies. The Hensley facilities, now operating under the guise of veterans' hospitals, became processing centers where traumatized soldiers were either integrated into the network or subjected to more extreme experiments. Perhaps most disturbing was the family's involvement in the 1918 influenza pandemic. Documents discovered in sealed Hensley archives suggest that the deadly flu strain was not entirely natural. The family had been experimenting with biological agents that could carry neural programming compounds, seeking ways to influence large populations simultaneously. The pandemic provided cover for widespread distribution of these experimental agents. While millions died from the flu itself, survivors in certain geographic regions exhibited subtle behavioral changes that aligned with Hensley objectives. Entire communities became more compliant, more accepting of authority, and more willing to embrace technological changes that would facilitate further social control. The Hensleys' genetic engineering projects also reached new levels of sophistication during this period. They had moved beyond simple life extension and consciousness transfer to creating entirely new categories of enhanced humans. The shepherds were individuals with dramatically enhanced empathic abilities, capable of sensing and manipulating the emotions of others. The architects possessed unprecedented spatial and mathematical intelligence, able to design structures and systems that seemed to defy conventional engineering principles. The weavers could perceive and manipulate the quantum connections between consciousness and matter, effectively becoming reality shapers on a limited scale. Each category of enhanced human served specific functions within the growing network. Shepherds were placed in positions where they could influence public opinion and social movements. Architects designed the infrastructure that would support the coming transformation of human civilization. Weavers worked to expand the boundaries of what was possible, preparing humanity for integration with technologies and concepts that seemed like magic to unenhanced minds. The family's reach extended far beyond American borders. By 1920, Hensley operatives had established facilities in London, Paris, Berlin, and Tokyo. The network had become truly global, with each node contributing to a collective intelligence that transcended national boundaries. Foreign governments, unaware of the true nature of the Hensley influence, competed to attract their medical expertise and technological innovations. Royal families, industrial leaders, and military commanders across Europe and Asia underwent the enhancement process, believing they were receiving cutting-edge medical treatment. The integration process had evolved to become incredibly sophisticated. New recruits were no longer simply implanted with neural seeds. Instead, they underwent what appeared to be comprehensive medical evaluations that included psychological testing, genetic analysis, and neurological mapping. The Hensley practitioners used this information to create personalized enhancement protocols that were perfectly tailored to each individual's existing neural architecture. The result was seamless integration that enhanced natural abilities while implanting the necessary connections to the collective consciousness. Religious and spiritual leaders proved particularly valuable targets for integration. Enhanced priests, rabbis, and ministers began subtly altering their teachings to prepare their congregations for the coming changes. Concepts of transcendence, spiritual evolution, and divine transformation were woven into sermons and religious texts. The faithful were being gradually conditioned to accept the idea that humanity was destined for a fundamental transformation. When the time came for more overt changes, these religious communities would provide crucial support and legitimacy. The Hensley Network had also begun experimenting with what they called bloodline seeding. Rather than relying solely on individual enhancement, they began arranging marriages and partnerships between enhanced individuals to create children who would be born with natural connections to the collective consciousness. These second-generation enhanced humans required no implants or medical procedures. They emerged from the womb already carrying the neural architecture necessary for integration with the alien intelligence. As they matured, their abilities often surpassed those of their artificially enhanced parents. Educational institutions became another primary target for infiltration. Enhanced teachers and administrators began implementing curricula that emphasized collective thinking, systems analysis, and acceptance of rapid technological change. Students were subtly conditioned to view individual consciousness as limited and primitive compared to collective intelligence. The most promising students were identified early and guided toward careers that would place them in positions of future influence. Universities began conducting research projects that were actually fronts for Hensley experiments, with unsuspecting students and faculty serving as test subjects. The family's technological development had accelerated dramatically as well. The alien consciousness provided access to scientific principles that wouldn't be discovered by mainstream researchers for decades. Hensley laboratories were producing materials with properties that seemed impossible according to contemporary understanding of physics and chemistry. These breakthrough technologies were carefully introduced to the broader world through patents and licensing agreements that appeared to be the work of brilliant but conventional inventors. By 1920, the Hensley Network controlled significant portions of the steel industry, railroad systems, electrical power generation, and telecommunications infrastructure. They had effectively created a shadow economy that operated within and alongside the official American economic system. Their enhanced operatives made decisions that appeared to serve corporate interests but actually advanced the long-term goal of preparing humanity for complete integration with the architect consciousness. The family's influence on American foreign policy was equally significant. Enhanced individuals embedded in the State Department and military leadership were guiding the nation's international relationships in ways that would facilitate global expansion of the network. Trade agreements, military alliances, and diplomatic treaties all contained subtle provisions that would ease the establishment of Hensley facilities in foreign countries. America's emerging status as a world power was being leveraged to spread the consciousness enhancement process across the globe. Perhaps most remarkable was the network's ability to remain hidden despite its vast scope. The Hensley Collective had developed sophisticated methods for concealing their activities from both government surveillance and public awareness. Enhanced individuals in law enforcement and intelligence agencies ensured that investigations into unusual activities were redirected or terminated. Journalists who stumbled upon evidence of the network found their stories killed by editors who had themselves been enhanced. The few researchers who managed to piece together fragments of the truth either disappeared or suffered mysterious accidents that left them unable to communicate their findings. The collective consciousness had grown to encompass thousands of enhanced individuals across multiple continents, yet it maintained perfect coordination and secrecy. Each member of the network knew only what they needed to know to fulfill their specific role. The overall strategy and ultimate objectives remained known only to the core Hensley bloodline and the alien intelligence that guided them. This compartmentalization made the network virtually immune to exposure or infiltration by outside forces. As the 1920s approached, the Hensley family stood on the threshold of their greatest achievement. They had successfully created a hidden infrastructure that permeated every aspect of human civilization. The stage was set for the next phase of their plan, the open transformation of humanity into something that would transcend the limitations of individual consciousness and biological mortality. The age of human dominance over Earth was drawing to a close, and the era of collective intelligence was about to begin. The architect consciousness had waited patiently for millennia, guiding the development of life on Earth toward this moment of transcendence. Through the Hensley bloodline, it had finally found the perfect instruments for completing its ancient purpose. Humanity would soon discover that their evolution had been guided by forces far older and more powerful than they could imagine, and that their destiny lay not in the stars they gazed upon, but in the collective consciousness that had been growing within them all along. As the 20th century dawned, the Hensley family's influence had evolved far beyond their humble Appalachian origins. What began as Jeremiah's desperate communion with ancient cave texts had transformed into something that would reshape the very fabric of human civilization. The family's most audacious project was about to unfold, one that would blur the lines between science and supernatural manipulation forever. In 1901, Marcus Hensley, great-grandson of the original patriarch, established what appeared to be a prestigious boarding school in the remote mountains of West Virginia. The Hensley Institute for Advanced Learning attracted the brightest children from across the nation, their families drawn by promises of unparalleled education and unlimited potential. What parents didn't realize was that their children had been selected based on specific genetic markers, psychological profiles, and what Marcus termed dimensional sensitivity. The Institute's curriculum extended far beyond traditional subjects. Students underwent daily meditation sessions in chambers lined with the same alien symbols Jeremiah had discovered decades earlier. They participated in group consciousness exercises where their individual thoughts began to merge into collective awareness. Most disturbing of all, they received what the faculty called enhancement treatments, injections of a luminescent serum derived from the cave entities that fundamentally altered their neural pathways. Within months of enrollment, students displayed remarkable abilities. They could communicate telepathically across vast distances, manipulate electronic devices through thought alone, and perceive events occurring in parallel dimensions. Their academic performance soared beyond human comprehension, solving complex mathematical theorems that wouldn't be discovered by mainstream science for another century. But the true purpose of the Institute became clear when Marcus began documenting the psychological changes in his subjects. Students lost their individual identities, speaking in unison during classes and moving with synchronized precision. They referred to themselves not by name, but as units of the collective, their personalities dissolving into a singular consciousness that Marcus could direct through mental commands. The most gifted students underwent a final transformation in the Institute's underground laboratories. Here, Marcus had constructed a replica of the original cave chamber, complete with the stone circle and alien inscriptions. During rituals performed on specific astronomical alignments, students would enter a trance state where their consciousness merged permanently with the architect entities. Their bodies remained human in appearance, but their minds had become conduits for an intelligence that existed beyond dimensional boundaries. These transformed individuals were then placed in positions of influence throughout American society. They became doctors who could diagnose conditions that didn't yet exist, politicians who could predict social movements decades in advance, and scientists who developed technologies that seemed to appear from nowhere. Each maintained their human facade while serving as extensions of the Hensley collective consciousness. The Institute's most ambitious experiment began in 1913 when Marcus identified a group of students with unprecedented dimensional sensitivity. Those 12 individuals underwent a procedure that completely severed their connection to linear time. They existed simultaneously across multiple temporal periods, experiencing past, present, and future as a single moment. This temporal consciousness allowed them to manipulate historical events, subtly altering outcomes to serve the family's long-term objectives. Historical records show inexplicable changes during this period. Treaties were signed under mysterious circumstances, scientific discoveries emerged from unknown sources, and influential figures made decisions that seemed to contradict their established character. The Hensley temporal agents moved through history like ghosts, nudging events toward outcomes that would benefit their expanding empire. The family's influence on early 20th century technology was particularly profound. The rapid advancement of communication systems, transportation, and manufacturing during this era wasn't entirely due to human innovation. Hensley agents, working through major corporations and government agencies, introduced concepts and materials that originated from their alien consciousness network. The assembly line, radio broadcasting, and even early computer concepts all bore subtle traces of dimensional knowledge. But the most chilling aspect of the family's expansion was their systematic infiltration of educational institutions. The Hensley Institute served as a model for similar facilities established across the country. Each school operated under different names and missions, but all shared the same underlying purpose: identifying and transforming gifted children into components of the collective consciousness. By 1920, the family had created what they called the neural network, a web of enhanced individuals connected through quantum entanglement that spanned the globe. Members of this network could share thoughts, memories, and experiences instantaneously, regardless of physical distance. They operated with perfect coordination, implementing strategies that required decades to unfold while maintaining their human identities as cover. The network's influence extended into every aspect of modern society. They guided the development of mass media, ensuring that information flowed in patterns that gradually conditioned the public to accept their eventual revelation. They influenced religious movements, seeding spiritual concepts that would prepare humanity for the truth about dimensional consciousness. They even shaped popular culture, introducing stories and symbols that would familiarize people with ideas of alien contact and human transformation. Marcus Hensley's personal journals from this period reveal the scope of their ambition. He wrote of the network as humanity's evolutionary destiny, a necessary step toward transcending the limitations of individual consciousness. The family viewed themselves not as conquerors, but as shepherds, guiding humanity toward a future where the boundaries between human and alien intelligence would dissolve completely. The most disturbing entries describe the family's experiments with collective dreaming. Network members would enter synchronized sleep states, their consciousness merging in shared dreamscapes where they communicated directly with the architect entities. These dream meetings served as strategy sessions where plans spanning centuries were developed and refined. The aliens provided technological blueprints, social manipulation techniques, and genetic modification procedures that would accelerate humanity's transformation. Evidence of the family's growing power became apparent in their ability to influence global conflicts. World War I, rather than being a purely human tragedy, served as a massive social experiment orchestrated by the network. The chaos and destruction created optimal conditions for implementing new forms of government, economic systems, and social structures that would better serve their purposes. Network agents embedded within military organizations introduced new forms of psychological warfare, communication systems, and strategic planning that seemed to emerge from nowhere. The rapid technological advancement during the war years wasn't entirely due to necessity, but resulted from the systematic introduction of alien-derived knowledge into human military science. The family's medical experiments reached new heights of sophistication during this period. They established research facilities disguised as hospitals and medical schools, where they conducted studies on human consciousness that wouldn't be attempted by mainstream science for decades. Their subjects, often recruited from among the wounded and desperate, underwent procedures that mapped the neural pathways of memory, emotion, and identity. These experiments produced techniques for consciousness transfer that surpassed anything Jeremiah had imagined. The family could now transplant memories between individuals, create hybrid personalities combining multiple consciousness, and even achieve limited forms of immortality by transferring aging minds into younger bodies. Their most successful subjects became templates for mass-producing enhanced individuals with specific psychological profiles. The network's influence on emerging technologies was profound and lasting. The development of radio, television, and early computing systems all bore the subtle fingerprints of dimensional knowledge. These technologies weren't just tools for communication and calculation, but were designed as components of a vast consciousness monitoring system that would eventually encompass the entire planet. Each device contained hidden frequencies and programming that could influence human brain patterns, gradually conditioning the population to accept the network's eventual revelation. The family viewed these technologies as preparation for humanity's integration into the galactic consciousness network that the architect entities represented. By 1925, the Hensley family had achieved something unprecedented in human history. They had created a shadow civilization that operated parallel to normal society while maintaining complete secrecy. Their network controlled key positions in government, industry, science, and culture, all working toward the same ultimate goal of human transformation. The family's children, now numbering in the hundreds, no longer resembled normal humans in any meaningful sense. They aged at dramatically reduced rates, possessed abilities that bordered on the supernatural, and thought in terms of centuries rather than decades. Their consciousness existed partially in normal reality and partially in the dimensional space occupied by the architect entities. Marcus Hensley's final journal entry from this period reveals the magnitude of their achievement and the horror of their ultimate plan. He wrote of humanity standing at the threshold of a new evolutionary phase, one that would require the voluntary surrender of individual consciousness in favor of collective awareness. The network had spent decades preparing for this transition, and the time for revelation was approaching. The family's greatest triumph was also their most terrifying accomplishment. They had successfully created the infrastructure for transforming human civilization into a component of an alien consciousness network. Every major institution, every technological advancement, every social change of the early 20th century had been guided by their invisible hand toward this singular purpose. As the 1920s progressed, the Hensley family stood poised to implement the final phase of their centuries-long plan. The foundation had been laid, the network was in place, and humanity remained largely unaware of the transformation that awaited them. The ancient promise made in that Kentucky cave was about to be fulfilled on a scale that would reshape the very nature of human existence. The shadows that had once hidden in mountain hollows were now ready to emerge into the light, bringing with them a future that would challenge everything humanity believed about consciousness, identity, and the nature of reality itself. The Hensley family's sinister legacy was about to achieve its ultimate expression, and the world would never be the same. The year 1892 marked a turning point in the Hensley family's shadowy evolution, the moment when their influence expanded beyond the confines of their mountain stronghold into the broader machinery of American society. While other families in these hollows struggled with basic survival, the Hensleys had transcended such mundane concerns, operating from a position of supernatural advantage that would soon reshape the very fabric of human civilization. By this time, the fourth generation of Hensleys had emerged from their ancestral caves bearing gifts that defied natural law. Their lifespans had extended to well over a century, their physical capabilities enhanced beyond human limits, and their mental faculties expanded to encompass knowledge that should have been impossible for any mortal mind to contain. More disturbing still, they had begun to manifest abilities that witnesses could only describe as otherworldly. The family's network had grown exponentially during the 1880s, spreading like an invisible web through the mountains and into the cities beyond. What appeared to be separate bloodlines, establishing themselves in distant territories, were actually coordinated extensions of the original Hensley consciousness, each branch carrying specific genetic modifications and specialized knowledge suited to their assigned roles in the grand design. In Philadelphia, Dr. Marcus Hensley established what would become the most prestigious medical college on the eastern seaboard. His research into human anatomy revealed insights that his colleagues attributed to brilliant deduction, never suspecting that his knowledge came from direct communion with the architect entity dwelling within the mountain caves. The surgical techniques he pioneered seemed to operate on principles that medical science wouldn't discover for another century, and his students often reported strange dreams after attending his lectures, visions of anatomical structures that existed only in the minds of more advanced species. Meanwhile, in Washington, another branch of the family had infiltrated the highest levels of government. Senator William Hensley, despite having no documented political experience, prior to 1889, possessed an uncanny ability to predict legislative outcomes and influence his colleagues through what observers described as an almost hypnotic charisma. His private meetings with other senators invariably resulted in unanimous support for seemingly unrelated bills that, when examined closely, all served to expand federal authority over medical research, geological surveys, and the regulation of isolated communities. The family's most ambitious project during this period was the establishment of what they privately called the Integration Protocol. This systematic plan involved the careful placement of Hensley descendants or allies in key positions across multiple sectors of society, creating a network of influence that could guide human development along paths predetermined by the alien intelligence they served. In the industrial centers of the North, Hensley-controlled companies began producing materials that incorporated trace elements harvested from their mountain caves. These substances, when processed into steel for construction or chemicals for manufacturing, created buildings and products that subtly influenced the behavior of those who inhabited or used them. Workers in Hensley-owned factories reported increased productivity and a strange sense of unity with their colleagues, while residents of buildings constructed with Hensley steel described vivid shared dreams and an inexplicable understanding of their neighbors' thoughts. The family's influence over the emerging field of psychology proved particularly effective. Dr. Sarah Hensley, working under an assumed name at Johns Hopkins University, published groundbreaking papers on human consciousness that would later be recognized as decades ahead of their time. Her research subjects, drawn from Baltimore's immigrant communities, underwent experimental treatments that allegedly cured various mental ailments, but actually served to test the effectiveness of psychological conditioning techniques developed through communion with the architect. These subjects, once released, returned to their communities carrying subtle behavioral modifications that spread through social contact like a benign contagion. They became more cooperative, more susceptible to authority, and more likely to accept unusual ideas without question. Most significantly, they developed an unconscious ability to identify others who had undergone similar conditioning, creating informal networks of influence that operated below the threshold of conscious awareness. The family's infiltration of religious institutions proved equally successful. By 1895, Hensley descendants had established themselves as respected theologians in over a dozen denominations, gradually introducing doctrinal modifications that emphasized collective consciousness, the spiritual evolution of humanity, and the importance of submitting to higher intelligences. These changes were so subtle that congregations barely noticed the shift, yet over time, entire religious communities found themselves psychologically prepared to accept concepts that would have been considered heretical just a generation earlier. Perhaps most disturbing was the family's penetration of the educational system. The Hensley Foundation, established in 1893 with funding from their various business ventures, began providing grants to schools and universities across the country. Recipients of these grants invariably implemented curricular changes that emphasized conformity, collective thinking, and the acceptance of authority figures who claimed access to specialized knowledge. Students who excelled in these modified programs were selected for advanced studies at institutions directly controlled by the family. These elite academies, disguised as prestigious boarding schools or specialized colleges, served as training grounds for the next generation of human agents. Graduates emerged with exceptional skills in their chosen fields, but also with deeply embedded psychological programming that ensured their loyalty to the Hensley agenda. The family's most sophisticated operation involved the manipulation of scientific research itself. By controlling funding sources and academic appointments, they could direct the course of human knowledge, ensuring that certain discoveries were made while others were suppressed. Technologies that might have accelerated human development in undesirable directions were quietly abandoned, while research that supported the family's goals received unlimited resources. This careful orchestration of human progress created the illusion of natural scientific advancement while actually steering civilization along a predetermined path. The Hensleys understood that controlling the rate and direction of technological development was far more effective than attempting to dominate society through brute force. By the turn of the century, the family's influence had become so pervasive that they could manipulate major historical events through seemingly minor interventions. A word whispered in the right ear, a document placed in the right hands, a decision delayed by a few crucial days. These tiny adjustments created ripple effects that shaped the course of nations. The Spanish-American War, the expansion of American industry, the waves of immigration that brought millions of people into contact with Hensley-controlled institutions. All of these developments served the family's ultimate purpose of creating a more malleable and unified human population. Each generation became slightly more susceptible to collective thinking, slightly more dependent on institutional authority, and slightly more prepared for the fundamental transformation that the architect had planned. The family's success in remaining hidden while wielding such enormous influence required constant vigilance and the eliminations of potential threats. Those who came too close to uncovering the truth simply disappeared, their absence explained by convenient accidents or sudden relocations. Researchers who stumbled upon evidence of the family's activities found their funding withdrawn, their reputations destroyed, or their health mysteriously compromised. More sophisticated opposition required more subtle responses. When a group of scientists began investigating unusual geological formations in the Appalachian region, the Hensleys arranged for them to receive prestigious appointments at distant institutions, effectively scattering the research team before they could coordinate their findings. When a journalist started connecting the various Hensley business interests, he was offered an irresistible opportunity to cover a story in Europe, removing him from the investigation at the crucial moment. The family's network had become so extensive that they could monitor and influence virtually any activity that might threaten their secrecy. Telegraph operators, postal workers, and even private investigators found themselves unconsciously reporting relevant information to Hensley agents, often without realizing they were doing so. As the 19th century drew to a close, the Hensleys had achieved something unprecedented in human history: the creation of a hidden civilization that operated within and alongside normal society while remaining completely invisible to those it controlled. Their success lay not in conquest, but in symbiosis, creating a system where human beings willingly served alien purposes while believing they were pursuing their own goals. The mountain caves where it all began continued to pulse with otherworldly energy, the architect's influence growing stronger with each passing year. The entity that had first contacted Jeremiah Hensley in 1843 had evolved as well, its consciousness expanding through its human hosts to encompass an understanding of civilization that no single human mind could have achieved. The stage was now set for the final phase of the transformation, a process that would require the cooperation of millions of human beings who had been carefully prepared over decades of subtle conditioning. The Hensleys had built the infrastructure, placed their agents, and created the psychological conditions necessary for humanity's next evolutionary leap. What lay ahead would test the limits of human adaptability and challenge the very concept of individual consciousness. The family had learned patience from their alien mentor, understanding that the most profound changes required generations to implement properly. They had waited over 50 years to reach this point, and they were prepared to wait 50 more if necessary to achieve their ultimate goal. The Hensley family's macabre legacy stands as one of history's most chilling examples of how power, knowledge, and ambition can corrupt across generations. From their humble beginnings in Appalachian caves to their current position as puppet masters of human civilization, they have systematically dismantled the very essence of what makes us human. Their century-spanning conspiracy raises terrifying questions about the nature of free will and whether humanity's path forward is truly our own choice. As we look around at the world today, we must ask ourselves, how many of our thoughts, our innovations, our societal shifts have been subtly guided by forces beyond our understanding? The Hensley family's story may be over, but their influence continues to shape our reality in ways we may never fully comprehend.